That's the context. So how do you think the administration should approach this, or how would you help us think about this question of civilian trials and the placement of the trial, or PSN and other high-value detainees?
Well, first of all, here again I would question the premise that the accusation of Democrats are soft-on terror is a political weapon. Democrats think that it is, they've internalized the fact that it is, but there's lots of empirical evidence that negates that premise. In 2006, people forget this, but Karl Rove was desperate to find some political strategy to salvage the Republican electoral prospects, because that was when the Iraq War was at the peak of its unpopularity. The country was sick of Republicans and ready to throw them out of office. And so Rove's strategy was to engineer two essentially inconsequential votes in the run-up to the 2006 midterm elections. One was on warrantless eavesdropping, whether you were for it or against it. And the other was the Military Commissions Act, which ended up being actually quite significant. And what he wanted to do was essentially have votes to force some small number of Democrats to take a stand against it, have huge numbers of Democrats vote in favor of it, and then do what he always does, which is, even though huge numbers of Democrats voted in favor of those things, run the campaign that the Democrats were soft on terrorism because a small handful stood their ground and voted against it. And that's what he did. Those two votes happened. The Military Commissions Act passed with large numbers of Democrats in Congress supporting it. The warrantless eavesdropping bill to legalize it never made it to the Senate, but lots of Democrats voted for it as well. And the entire campaign was a fear-mongering campaign that the Democrats were going to be soft on terror and cause you to be slaughtered by the terrorists. And the Republicans got slaughtered themselves in that election. It was one of the worst, most humiliating defeats in the midterm election, even though the soft on terror accusation was the centerpiece of the campaign. And of course in 2008 they tried the same thing and it didn't fare much better. So I think as we have temporal and emotional distance between where we are and the trauma of 9/11, those tactics become substantially less effective. But the other point I wanted to make about Holder and civilian trials and the like, and it relates back to what we were talking about earlier about the concept of faux pragmatism and how it's really just a pretext for jettisoning principles. One of the reasons why the administration is having such a difficult time defending civilian trials, whether in New York or otherwise, and it's almost certain at this point that they're going to reverse even the small number of civilian trials that they've already decided they were going to grant, including to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The reason is because there's no coherent argument that the White House can make in defense of that decision. If you were somebody who were genuinely committed to civilian trials, you could stand up and tell Americans that central to our system of justice, what distinguishes us from other countries, what we were all taught as children, made us better than tyranny, was that the government doesn't have the right to put people into cages without charging them with a crime and proving their guilt in a court of law. And you could give very stirring and value-based and principled arguments in favor of that mindset, and I believe persuade lots of Americans who are inculcated with those values that you're right, and that you can actually keep the country safe and simultaneously adhere to that central principle. The problem is that the Obama administration is denying civilian trials to enormous numbers of detainees, the vast majority. They're putting lots of them before military commissions. They're going to put lots of others into cages with no trial of any kind, not even before military commissions, just detain them indefinitely. So once you do that, once you split yourself in that way, how is it that you could possibly stand up and give a stirring and passionate and principled and coherent defense of your decision to give civilian trials to the accused 9/11 attackers? How can you stand up and say civilian trials are the bedrock of our system of justice when you're the very same person who are simultaneously denying civilian trials to a whole litany of detainees? And so I think that's one of the ways in which this faux kind of pragmatism, this unprincipled approach to these issues also ends up not just being unprincipled and wrong on its face, but diluting the political appeal as well. And I think that's one of the main reasons they have big problems. That's what the Republicans are saying. Well, look, you're using military commissions. You've conceded that they're right. You've conceded we were right when we used military commissions. How can you say that military commissions are un-American and oppressive? How can you say indefinite detention is un-American and oppressive when you yourself are using them? And I think that's the real problem, the real bind that they've created for themselves, not just on this issue, but a whole slew of others. That's where pragmatism gets you, is it prevents you from offering a coherent defense of your own position.